Second speaker today, Nathalie Schulz, is presenting a paper on Bodleian Libraries Chinese Catalogue Migration Project. Nathalie started her career as a cataloguer at an academic library in Australia. She's been secretary of the Joint Steering Committee for the Development of RDA and has held various positions with the Bodleian Libraries, most recently as a systems analyst working with Aleph and Primo. Over to you, Nathalie.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Okay. All right, that's, what are people not seeing that? Oh, hang on. How's that? Better?
Much better, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about a project we've had over the last, I guess, couple of years at the Bodleian Libraries to do with the migration of our Chinese catalogue. I'll start off with a bit of background and why we're doing the project, then talk about the different challenges that we faced, and then sort of wrap up with a few lessons learned. So, just to give some background, in the early 1990s, the Bodleian Library implemented a catalogue of Chinese language material using software called Allegro. And I've got a link there to more information, but it is all in German. It was developed in Germany. At the time, there are a number of advantages to using Allegro. It meant that Chinese script could be used, which library systems at the time did not let you do. And it also provided a way to display hierarchical relationships of Chinese collected works, or Collectanea, or Songshu. And I'll talk more about them later. And Allegro is also very customizable, which led to the development of an in-house format. So fast forward many years, and by 2020, the catalogue had over 200,000 records, and they were in Unicode. And there was holdings and items information for Chinese language materials in the Bodleian Library. We have a KB Chen China Center Library, and also for small collections in other libraries, like there's an Eastern Art section in our Sackler Library. And there's a web interface for discovery of those Chinese records. Now, there are a few disadvantages. First of all, the Chinese catalogue's not integrated with the library management system we use, which is Ex Libris Aleph, or with our resource discovery system, which goes by the name of Solo, and which has Ex Libris Primo as the software behind it. I hesitate to say this, it's only a catalogue. It's a very beautiful catalogue, but it is only a catalogue in that there is no provision for circulation or acquisitions functions. So an example of what this means in practice is that when people want to request records, resources in our book storage facility, Chinese material, they go to Allegro, they find it, and then they have to sort of follow a number of steps through to Solo, and the reason for that is that circulation is managed through Aleph. So I'll just sort of show you what that looks like. So this is an example of a record in the Allegro catalogue, and you'll see that there's a big order this book in red down the bottom of the record. If people click on that, it launches a search in Solo using the Allegro system number, and from there people can actually request material from our closed stack. You'll notice that the record in Solo doesn't have any Chinese script. It's just a very brief record with a transliterated title and a date. When sort of these records started to be needed in the library system, it was one that it was before we were in Aleph, and non-Roman scripts display wasn't supported. So some other disadvantages. The in-house format means that it's not possible for us to contribute records to external catalogues such as Library Hub or WorldCat, and also it means it's not possible to import records because records we'd import would be in MOC 21. Also, any staff who want to add records to the catalogue need to learn the in-house format, so it becomes another thing for people to learn. The Allegro catalogue uses traditional form Chinese characters, and it uses those in all records, whether or not the resource uses traditional form characters or not. And this means that searching in simplified Chinese is not possible. And simplified Chinese is what the majority of people, say from the People's Republic of China, are used to using. So it's actually a barrier for people used to using simplified Chinese that the Allegro catalogue can only be searched in traditional Chinese characters. And I guess finally, in sort of, I guess, the current climate, a separate system that needs infrastructure behind it, that has to be hosted, the software has to be kept updated and maintained. That's an issue. There's a cost to that. There's been, I guess, in different parts of the library for a number of years, there's been a desire to add the Chinese Allegro catalogue to our main catalogue, but the real kickstart to that happened with the appointment of a new head of East Asia and Chinese Studies librarian in 2018. He conducted some research into the user experience of the Allegro catalogue, which highlighted the strengths that it does have, but also a number of the weaknesses that I've just mentioned. So in October 28, we had the first discussions about moving the Chinese Allegro catalogue into Aleph, into Mark 21, and also into Solo. And we wanted to sort of reap the benefits of integration with existing systems. And there's also a big advantage in that Solo enables searching using simplified Chinese characters. So sort of the very first thing we did was to consult with the British Library, who have an ongoing project to migrate their Chinese Allegro catalogue. The British Library took the approach of there being some initial conversion into Mark 21, and then having someone with Chinese language knowledge do batch edits on the records. That wasn't an option for us in terms of resourcing, and also we're sort of about 10, we have basically 10 times the number of records that the British Library does. So timing would also have been an issue. But it was really valuable to find out the sort of edits that the British Library were doing, and really helpful for sort of understanding what would be involved in the project. So start of last year, we had a sort of very simple proof of concept to say, okay, could we actually do this? Could we actually convert records to Mark 21 and do it in-house? And we found that we could. So March 2019, we formed an internal project board with stakeholders within the libraries. I'll just mention at this point that there was no separate funding for this project. It was all done with existing staff. There was the systems analyst, that's me, and there are also programmers who helped as well. And the work was done alongside business as usual tasks and other projects that were happening. So there would be, weeks at a time where I simply didn't have the opportunity to work on it. So 2019, lots of work on the metadata mapping and associated fix routines. There was frequent consultation with our project board, the bibliographic standards librarian, and some user testing. And then at the start of this year, we were able to do a pilot load to a test version of Aleph and Solo, which was successful. And then at the end of February, we closed the Chinese catalogue to new records. And the plan at that stage was fairly soon after that to start the migration. I think, well, that didn't happen. I was very busy with lockdown-related tasks. And so it is only now in September that the migration is going to begin. So just to give you a little bit of technical information, the conversion from the in-house format to Mark 21 was done using Aleph tables and fix routines. So even though my role was a systems analyst, which is sort of working out what needs to be done, I was actually also the technician in this case. So creating all of the Aleph fixes and working on the tables. And I added everything up, and there were over 1,000 lines of changes involved in that. There was also pre-conversion work done on the XML file by programmer colleague using XQuery and XSLT. And another colleague in my own team developed some Perl scripts that were used when the records were in the Aleph local format, which is called the Aleph sequential format. So I'll just talk now a little bit about the challenges that we faced. So the first one, I guess, obviously, I suppose, is language. There was no Chinese language knowledge in the technical team. This was very much a systems project. Things were being done in bulk, and in that sort of situation, if you have to sort of trust that things have been put in the right place. So if a certain field is for the title, you trust that what's there in the title, because you can't tell whether there are errors or mistakes. I guess I have to say Google Translate was not always my friend. Particularly, I would use it, I'd use it sometimes just to sort of look at things, say, to do with types of binding or publishing terms. And when I consulted with my Chinese-speaking colleagues, the Chinese studies librarian and the Chinese cataloger, sometimes they were found it quite funny, to be honest, some of the things that Google Translate came up with. So obviously I did a lot of checking with them about things that I wasn't sure about. Another issue is that the language of cataloguing in the Chinese catalogue is Chinese, even for things such as the physical description. So I've given an example there of what the physical description looks like for a record. At Oxford, our language of cataloguing is English, and so we made the decision to translate information that's recorded, such as the physical description and the ISBN qualifiers, when we could do that. Our second challenge was to do with the format. As I mentioned before, an in-house format was developed, very well documented, so it was very clear, what elements were going into what fields. In that format, the original script, the Chinese, is given primacy, which means that it's sort of the first element in any field, and the transliteration, so the Chinese language put into our Roman or Latin script, is in a subfield 9. So this is a field display in the Chinese catalogue for a fairly simple modern record. And you can see, there that the tag 100 contains the ISBN. So very different to Mark 21. So in Oxford, we give primacy to the transliteration with the original script in 880 fields. We're following Mark 21, in other words. So this is the same record that's been put into Mark 21, and this is a display from Aleph. And you will see that we have main field 245 with the transliterated title, and then the 880 field with subfield 6245 that goes with it, that has the Chinese script. This is what the that same record looks like in solo, and you'll see that actually there the vernacular, the Chinese script, has been given prominence, which is really as it should be, because that is what's on the resource. Some fields in this process really did not map neatly to Mark 21. There's a 409 field for a traditional edition statement, which we tried putting a lot of different places until we decided to put it into a 880 field of type 500 unpaired with the transliterated field, because not all of the Allegro fields have transliteration with them, only some of them do. Also, the Allegro format, in cases where there's no collective title, allows you to have, in a sense, multiple titles proper and statements of responsibility. And so I had to find a way to put them all into a 245 field, which, does not give as nice a display as the Allegro catalogue does, I have to admit. It was really clear as part of this project that we wanted to make it clear, especially when these records go out into the wild, into other external databases, that these are not full either AACR2 or RDA records. So we had a leader 17 encoding level as 2. In leader 18, we did say that ISBD punctuation is included, because it has been. In the cataloguing source, we made it clear that our language of cataloguing is English in the subfield B. And we also added an 884 field, description conversion information, just to make it clear that this was a conversion from another catalogue. We did toss up whether or not to include in the records that the transliteration that's been used does not follow the ALA LC romanization tables, but in the end we decided that that we wouldn't include a separate note about that, because it's really not, there's not sort of a coded place that we could put that. So on to the next challenge, which is a big one. Collectanea, or another way we refer to them is collectaneous works, Shuangshu. It's basically a collection of works in a series or anthology. And in the Chinese Allegro catalogue, we have a record for the top level work, and then analytic records for all of the works within the top level work. And over half of the Chinese catalogue, over 100,000 records, are made up of records in these hierarchies. So just let me show you an example of what one of these looks like in the Chinese catalogue. So we have at the very top of the record the information about the top level or parent record. And then underneath it, in a very nice display, we have, in a sense, that what we've called in the project the children, subordinate titles within that, and then some of them have with subordinate within that, sort of grandchildren records. So just to give some statistics, we've got just about 4,000 of these sort of top level records, but then we have like over 90,000 of the child records, and then a much smaller number of grandchildren, then great-grandchildren, and then even 12 great-great-great-grandchildren records. But even though we've got all these bibliographic records, out of all of that, there's only just over 29,000 unique barcodes. So 29,000 circulating things. So, you know, those may be volumes, they may be boxes with multiple things in them, but it just shows the different, you know, this really sort of extreme analytic cataloguing. So we made the decision to retain the different levels of records in the migration, parent, child, grandchild, etc. And we did that because searchers in Solo are more likely to be looking for the contents rather than the titles of the collected volumes. Now, unlike the Allegro catalogue, the parent record in Aleph and Solo is not going to list the contents of the child, but a search for the parent does bring up both the parent and child records, and there'll also be a search for individual titles. And child records, again, will also have a link to search for the parent title. Let me just explain, give an example. So this is an example of a top-level record in the Allegro catalogue. This is a work where there are 120 volumes in 11 cases. The barcodes are on the cases. This is something in our book storage facility. And there are 32 child works as part of this. I've not had room on the screen to list them all there. And this is an example of what the first of the cases looks like. The shelf marking scheme, there's very consistent shelf marking scheme that's been used for the Chinese records. So this first case has 7 small volumes in it, and it's made up of 3 works in 1 volume, and then there's 1 work that spans the other 6 volumes in the case. And this is quite a common situation with the collectaneous works, that a work can span multiple volumes. And I'll just show you there what it looks like opened up, and you can see the string binding that's used on the volumes. So in Allegro, the child, when you look at a child record, you see a little bit of information about the child record, but then you see information about the top level record that it comes with. And this is done using linking fields in the records, because when you actually look at the child records themselves, they don't contain details of the top level record. So as you can see, they're just a very small number of fields in that tag display of the Chinese Allegro record. So as part of the XML pre-processing, some fields from the top level record were added to the child record. So things like their language, edition, publication series. We mapped to sort of the usual fields in the record, but information about the parent relating to the title, statement of responsibility, physical description, that traditional edition statement were added to a 580 linking entry complexity note and the associated 880 field. and were also added to a 773 field and the associated 880 field. So just to show you sort of the end result of that in Solo, this is a child record, and you'll see that it's got its own sort of title and author information, some publication information that's come from the parent. And then there are sort of two bits of information about what it's related to. There's information coming from the 773 field and the 880, and then information from the 580 field with that part of prefix. The 773 field does allow you to include a lot of the information that we've included in the 580, but it was the author information that was not going to fit very neatly into the appropriate field in the 773, which is one reason why we decided to split the information. So if you click on one of those red is part of links in Solo, it launches a search which brings up both the parent record and also child records as well. And looking at the parent record in Solo, we've actually added a link there that says search for individual titles, which is really just putting the title information into a place where it can be a clickable link. So with the display, with the migration to Aleph and Solo, we lose the very nice hierarchical display of Collectanea that is in the Allegro catalogue. And user testing was conducted by members of our resource discovery user group with a small number of academics, postgraduates and undergraduates to make sure that people could actually navigate their way around the records and that the migrated records would work for them. And I have to say, I wasn't involved in the user testing, which I think is a good thing because I'm obviously highly invested in the record and in the projects. And I was, yeah, but it was great to find out the results of that because they did confirm that people could navigate between them. On to my next challenge, which is to do with items and holdings. In the Allegro catalogue, a barcode can be listed multiple places. So in these Collectanea works, it's listed with the parent and all of the children and grandchildren as appropriate. But in a library system such as Aleph, which is used for circulation, you can only have a barcode in one item. And so then you have to decide, well, which item gets the barcode? Aleph has a mechanism where you have the barcode in one item on a bibliographic record, and other records that are sort of in that physical container have a pointer, which means that the item displays with them both in Aleph and Solo. And what we're aiming to do is have barcodes on the top level records and all of the other records to have the pointers. And the important thing here is that whatever record in the hierarchy someone comes across in Solo, they should see the barcode, which means, importantly, that if it's in the book storage facility, they're able to request it. So we didn't want the situation where people could find something they wanted, and then it just had a system-generated barcode, and they couldn't actually do anything with it. So there was a lot of pre-processing work in the original XML export from Allegro because some top-level records didn't have the barcodes with them in Allegro. They were only on the child records. And we had the reverse. Some child records didn't have barcode information, but they're on the parent records. The loading is going to be quite complicated because there's sort of 4 different workflows for removing those existing stub records I mentioned before for things in the book storage facility, and then adding new records depending on whether the barcode is shared, as it is with Collectanea works, but there are also a lot of unrelated things that have been boxed together for ease of storage, cases where the barcode isn't shared, things that don't have a barcode, and then there are also a few holdings from some of the Oxford colleges which have to be treated in a different way. So I guess I wanted to leave you, I suppose, more with the feeling better you than me, or thankfulness that you weren't having to do this project yourself, just to talk a bit about lessons learned. And I guess for me, these were often lessons relearned because, you know, I've done a few different projects with of this sort, converting catalogues and also catalogues from non-Roman scripts. First was to sort of document everything. especially in a project like this where I was going away and coming back, often at a gap, just documenting the mapping to Mark 21 from the local format so that I could say, oh, why is this here? Oh, that's why. That was in a Word document, which I could easily share with other people and ask for feedback. And it was also in the Aleph fixes. Also documented the few categories of records we're going to exclude, such as manuscripts, because they'll be handled in a different way. Changes to the XML, used GitLab when I was working with the programmer working on that, and that was great actually, just because it's a really good record of the changes that were made. And I've been documenting workflows in a Confluence wiki that we have. And I guess one thing I really found is that fixing and manipulating records in a project like this is a really iterative process. So I was constantly comparing and checking for unintended changes. Because I was working sort of in a Unix window, I was using sort of a diff command to just see what has changed. Is it only what I intended to change? Because there would be times when I think, oh, why is that like that? I'll change that. Not remembering that I relied on that bit of information sort of, several fixes further down. And I also found it really useful to have a set of reference records, about 20 records, both books, serials, and other formats, that I could just quickly run my scripts on them and just make sure that they were still looking as they should do. When I first submitted the sort of proposal to do this paper, I thought that by this stage the project would be over and I'd be able to share sort of outcomes on how sort of the records were, I guess, being received. I guess all I can really share is some comments that came from the user testing, which are very encouraging. So one person said, it's very clear and much more user-friendly. We're looking forward to start using the new system. And then another one saying this is going to be a game changer for our undergraduate students to be able to discover all the Chinese material in solo. So I'm hoping that once we've completed the migration, that there'll be more comments such as this. So that's my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions. And please do also contact me by email if you would like to.
Thank you, Nathalie. That's absolutely fantastic. If anybody does have any questions, please pop them through to the chat. But if I can just say how lovely it is to see the sort of analytical cataloging, because I don't know if you were watching the serials section yesterday, but I was commenting on how that's, well, to my mind, that's how every record should be. It's all about relationships, and you should be able to come in at whatever point you want. So it's really lovely to see that in use, and I totally feel for you. That's a lot of work. I have a question about the audience, the user experience research, if I may. How did you go about that?
Well, we loaded some records to one of our test systems, and then they developed a script. So basically, so that it could be consistent. So they brought in people sort of to an office, I suppose, or lab or something, and sort of basically gave them things to find, and sort of said whether, finding out whether people had noticed particular things, or say to them, well, now, what would you do if you wanted to actually get this from the book storage facility? So yeah, it was scripted out.
Okay, so you targeted effectively users from
Yeah,
various areas, and
yeah, like I said, I guess it was undergraduate, postgraduate, and academic. Yeah,
brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. We have a question from Helen. She says, what encoding format did you use? For example, Mark 8 or UTF-8, etc.
UTF-8, Unicode. The records were already in that. There was something a few years ago that put them into that format. So that was one thing we didn't have to do.
Okay. Just see. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask about was the hierarchy, because I think you said that they didn't miss the hierarchy. That was one of the comments.
Beg your pardon? They didn't miss it.
Yeah.
I think there will be people who miss it, people who, scholars who are interested in classical Chinese, because as I understand it, the display in the Allegro catalogue matches a classical Chinese catalogue. Right. So I think there probably will be some people who will, but I think there's also, as I understand it, a large cohort of people who are, in a sense, not interested in that. They just want to, they're interested in more modern materials, perhaps. So I think, it's unfortunate, but
that's okay. I have one more question, if you don't mind, and that's, to me, whenever there's any kind of data migration happens, my mind always goes to the next system that comes along. So obviously you probably won't be changing systems soon, but did you have any thought as to, when you were making the changes, of how easily then this could be imported, migrated in the future?
Yeah, I mean, Aleph has Aleph and Primo together have a feature where you can actually make links between records, but that's using a proprietary, like their own field.
Yeah.
And we sort of thought, no, we're not going to do that because we're not sure that that's something that would migrate. Mm-hmm. Also, too, it wasn't that great because it would list all of the sort of child works, but it wasn't listing them in a nice order or anything. And it was just the transliterated title. So yeah, so I think for us, we have a lot of things that use the mechanism, where multiple barcode is shared. We call them most of the time bound widths. We've got thousands of them already. So in a sense, we were trying to be consistent with what we've done for other things.
Cool. We've got one question and then we will have to close because we're a minute over, but Philip is asking, will the historic Allegro catalogue still be accessible for researchers, or will it be completely switched off?
I think the intent is to switch it off, but I think we have other, there's not a date for that at the moment, because there are other collection, other catalogues that use Allegro actually at the Bodleian. Our John Johnson catalogue, printed ephemera, actually uses Allegro as well. So it will be turned off at some stage, but we don't know. We don't have a date for that.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for the questions, and thank you very, very much for your presentation. It was absolutely fabulous.